Howdy, welcome to another exciting episode of IAPD's The Park Cast. I'm not your usual host, I'm Maura Freeman, IAPD's Director of Advocacy and Strategic Initiatives, and today we are joined by a massive history buff, perhaps the coolest grandpa in the world, for the luckiest little grandson in Pekin, Illinois, and former IAPD Chairman of the Board and current Commissioner of the Pekin Park District. And as if that's not enough, he also runs his own podcast called, and this is Gillis, I'm going to let him introduce his podcast to you.
Maura, it's called What's the Story Pekin?
What's the Story Pekin?
Yeah.
And we've been chatting off camera quite a bit about the history of that podcast, and I know you and Wayne, the usual host, did do an episode about the podcast, but I'm really interested in capturing the history of your community, as you have for over 100 episodes. Can you talk about why history is so important and why we need to document it in that way?
Well, that was actually a discovery from doing this and sharing history episodes. As I shared with Wayne, I was concerned that there may not be an interest, that it may bore people, and I was somewhat surprised in how passionate curiosity people had. And I think a lot of it was the format, because now you could just pick your episode and listen to it. It was titled, and you could find out a little bit more. From that, then we also started culling those down to be a time frame that I think worked more for people. You know, there are 3-hour podcasts. They're especially that when it comes to history stories, because I've listened to some of those. But I've discovered that the shorter, the better for people, because they're more likely to do that dive into it versus, okay, that's an hour, they start it, and then they get distracted in other things, and they don't hear all the story. So it's been a learning experience from how to put one of these on, where the interest lies with folks, but also the fact that there is a real strong interest in local history, because it's something a lot of people do not know.
You're absolutely right. I mean, IAPD is about to celebrate our 100th anniversary in 1928. And Pekin celebrated your 200th anniversary in 2024.
Yes,
is that right?
Last year.
So last year you had your bicentennial. We're about to celebrate our centennial. And I've been cultivating a history of the building that we're sitting in. And what I've learned is that we've lost, in the changing of hands, we'd lost a lot of the history. And it was really challenging to pick up those pieces and put together a story and to find who played the roles in this building. You have this great podcast capturing your community's history. Can you speak to capturing the Park District's history in Pekin?
That was perhaps where the most interest was, because in our communities, I'm sure in all that are members of IAPD, the Park District is kind of the iconic gathering place in the community. So it's cherished in a very meaningful way for folks. And so to share that story, how this got started, and especially some of the iconic locations within the park, I think meant a lot to a lot of people. So I wrote an article, and we've posted elsewhere, and it's kind of the genesis of the Park District. Who are the people who got this started? We have this historic pavilion, and it took me quite a bit of effort to find out, why did the first park board build a pavilion? Until I realized the very first park district in the state was the Peoria Park District. And they had a conservatory, which was fairly common in some of the areas around Chicago. And I realized when I looked at ours and looked at the old historic pictures of their first conservatory, they were very similar. And my speculation is that when Pekin started its park district, they said, we have to have a pavilion or a conservatory like Peoria, because it had become a popular gathering place then. But in Pekin, a lot of people, because we have this historic pavilion on the lagoon, and it's one of those places, when I first came there, because I'm not a native, I was a 20-year-old with kind of a meet the parents type thing, and I saw that and I was bowled over that, wow, this is really, really pretty special that you have. And I've learned that to people, that's what it means. And really for a lot of younger people, and we've talked about even a motto, it's kind of like, it's a place to call home. And a lot of people, I've noticed that they'll bring their grandkids and they can go to the same park, the same playground. That of course has been updated due to OSLAT. But they can bring their grandchildren to the same place that they hung out. And I think that has a very deep, nostalgic, emotional feeling for folks. And so I think to then the natural curiosity be, well, how did this get started? Grandpa, where did that building come from? How old is that building? And what's the story behind it? So we've really done some background on that and shared that story with folks. That pavilion was built in 1905, opened on the 4th of July weekend. And I was sharing with you beforehand, I've seen period pictures of the 1920s or 1930s, one of a sports team. Well, you look at the uniforms and can tell, gosh, those are really old. But looking at the background of the picture, you realize, gosh, they could have dressed in that stuff and the picture be taken last week. And there's something about, in a world that's constantly changing, unlike Europe and elsewhere, where you can go over to Europe and go into a town and see buildings that have been around for centuries. We have a history of it outlives its usefulness, we tear it down and replace it with something else. And so I think to have that one constant in life, in our communities, makes a lot of sense. I always joke about a phrase a former late mayor shared with me, and I share this often. He told me, he said, Gary, people in Pekin are all in favor of progress as long as it doesn't change things. And there is something to be said about being able to come out to the park. And everything's modernized, everything's up to date, benches, facilities, restrooms, etc. But there still is that cherished sense of history. And so that's a reminder that people, whether they know it or not, really do have an interest in history.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think in my generation that reflects in Throwback Thursday posts.
Sure.
Like we
sure.
like them. We like them a lot. But it's hard sometimes to justify the resource expense of committing to preserving
Sure.
history, especially when you're talking on a small scale, for example, like a park district.
Sure.
When you're talking to a commissioner from another park district who's interested in starting that preservation process, what kind of advice do you give them? And can you speak to maybe the impact that they can use to justify the preservation of the history in their park district?
Well, I think just naturally you'll find that visitors have a natural interest. We have in our park a statue of Everett Dirksen, a former Senate Minority Leader who was from Pekin. And I remember when we took the statue that was created and put it on a marble pedestal. Now in the base, the sculptor put a little bit of what his name was. It's very, very hard to read, and you really wouldn't know it. I remember one day I was there. I was bike riding, stopped to rest there, and somebody comes up and is looking at it. And I said, well, can I help you? And she says, yeah, who is that? And I said, well, that's Everett Dirksen. She looks at me and says, well, who is he? And so we're a generation removed, and his story, the impact he had in history, especially with the Civil Rights Act in 1964, that's just lost. So I raised some funds, talked to some people, confirmed some of the historical data, and now the pedestal base has kind of a little bit of his biography. There's caricatures at the base of the statue that have a symbolic meaning, so I have a little explanation with that. So someone seeing that now understands the story of Everett Dirksen and the impact he had, and then we're proud of the fact that that statue and that lesson, if you will, is right there in a cherished spot in the park.
That's incredible.
Now the other thing, it reminds me, and I think park districts should give some thought to this, is for our bicentennial last year, we created plaques to put on some of the old buildings downtown. And it says this building has a story, and it has a QR code. And so you can go to that QR code and you can hear the story, and it goes back to generations. And all these buildings started out as you know, whether it was a retail establishment that turned professional, that turned retail again, you can go through that story. And you could also have it an audio presentation of it. One thing that I did when we established our foundation, speaking of our historic pavilion, you have so many visitors, and it has a tourism element because so many people have family reunions and other things there, right on the lagoon, playground, paddle boats. It's a great place to gather people. But people walk into this and they see the old hardwood and the floors, and their natural question is, well, how old is this building? What was it before? originally was kind of the caretaker of the original park's residents at that time. So what we did was, I had someone on staff find and dig out the old architectural schematics.
How fun.
So we had that frame with then a little bit of a story with it. But now we can put a QR code, because we just basically put in a little granite stone on the building, 1905. But we have to add to it that QR code so people can hear the story, whether it's visitors or residents. And the Harry Truman once said, the only thing new in the world is the history we do not know. So here's the opportunity for people to learn that story. And I would encourage anybody in their park district to find the story of those buildings and record it in some way and have it some fashion where you can share that with others, because the interest is there.
The interest is there, and I think you're absolutely right. It's easy enough to justify. Mm-hmm. So I want you to leave us with one more idea. Do you think that preserving these historical components of our communities attract tourists to our communities?
Well, there is I think it's becoming more visible or high profile. And we're part of the Great Illinois Riverway. And there's just people that have that interest and want to know more and know the story of these communities. And nowadays, especially, we went on a little road trip this weekend. The predominance of the color orange was somewhat mind-blowing, because there's construction everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people I want to get out of the concern about rush hour traffic or work zones ahead, and just go out in the country and go from town to town. And I've believed, and we did this with my grandson when we took him to New Salem last year. It's just old log cabins. But then we stopped in Petersburg to get some ice cream. But the first thing I did before that is I looked up park districts or neighborhood parks. And we found one that every park has, in every community, has something different than you have back home. Mm-hmm. And we spent over an hour there, a couple of hours. And he had all new friends. He really hated to leave. So I think park districts and facilities, because every park district may have something unique to it that will attract other people. Bike trails are certainly an example of that. And I've taken my bike to a community or two, and I park in their park district or some parking lot and access their trail. But it's not, there's no visitor center, there's no ticket sales to something that is in strong demand, but you have a lot of people that want to maybe avoid tourism crowds and just on their own bring their family and enjoy that. And I think a person could have a lot of fun going from community to community to community and see what they have to offer. And you can certainly go to the website and just look. We were talking earlier about going to Pontiac, and Pontiac has three rope bridges. Well, we don't have that in Pekin. I don't know anything in the few communities around us. So I think it would be anybody who now uses tourism as a discovery vehicle should look at park districts as some place to go. And you can find historic places, just like going to New Salem, but there are other things that, especially with family interests, that may go beyond, okay, we learned this history lesson, now where's some of the other fun places we can go.
It is certainly a really great opportunity to preserve this history and use it as an opportunity to get people to parks.
And I've visited a number of them in some meetings I've been to, and I walk into their building, whether it's old or new, there's a story to it. Mm-hmm. One we had here in Springfield recently was a building that was donated by somebody in honor of his special needs daughter. Well, natural question is, well, there's a story behind that. It was obviously emotion-filled. What was the story? What was her story? And I think there's something to be said for then having that available for visitors to learn a little more about, because the curiosity, like I said, is there.
The curiosity is there, the opportunity is there, and if you've got questions, I think Gillis is a really great resource to start with as you're considering preserving history of your park district.
Yeah, feel free. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and be sure to check out Parkcast, as Wayne did in the last episode. QR code's right here. Maybe it's over here. We're making Wayne's life hard. It's over here now. Yeah. You should definitely check out the Parkcast, and thanks for not Parkcast. You should check out the podcast. What's the Story Pekin? Thanks for joining us on another episode of Parkcast.